I heard your conversation, the little girl told the millionaire in the cemetery, but when she reveals what he said, he becomes furious and does something terrible. Comment telling me what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and let me know which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The silence of the Willow Creek Municipal Cemetery was broken by the sound of the footsteps of Arthur Blackwood, a 62-year-old businessman who walked among the rows of white marble with clockwork precision. 6 in the morning, sharp, like every day for the past 3 years. His hands trembled slightly as he held the bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers Eleanor had loved to grow in their garden at home before she departed from this life. "Good morning, my love," Arthur murmured as he knelt before the simple headstone that bore his wife's name. "Another day without you, another day carrying this weight in my chest." His choked voice echoed in the damp morning air, mixing with the distant song of robins heralding the dawn. Arthur possessed 3 characteristics that defined his striking personality: an unyielding stubbornness that had made him the owner of one of the largest furniture store chains in the region, a devastating guilt that had consumed him since he realized too late what an absent husband he had been, and an emotional vulnerability he kept hidden under layers of business success. The internal conflict that tormented him daily was the constant battle between his need for absolute control and the utter helplessness he felt in the face of Eleanor's irreversible loss. "I should have been more present," he continued, placing the flowers on the grave with reverent care. "I should have skipped those endless meetings. I should have noticed you were getting sick. Forgive me for being too late for everything." The tears that had insisted on welling up every morning for 3 years began to stream down his wrinkled face, leaving salty tracks he no longer bothered to hide. It was then that a child's voice, as clear as morning crystal, interrupted his solitary conversation. "I heard your conversation, mister," Arthur startled, turning quickly toward the voice. Behind an ornate mausoleum just a few meters away stood a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her brown hair was disheveled and dirty, her clothes a mix of faded fabrics that were clearly too big for her small, thin frame, and her large, dark eyes carried a sadness that didn't match her tender age. Who are you?" Arthur asked, quickly wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "What are you doing here alone, child?" The girl emerged from behind the mausoleum with cautious steps, like a small wild animal, unsure if it could trust him. "My name is Sophie," she said with an unsettling seriousness for someone so small, "and I know exactly what you need to do to find peace." Arthur's heart nearly stopped. There was something in the way that child looked at him, an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "What do you mean? And where are your parents? A girl your age shouldn't be here alone." Sophie took a few more steps closer, her bare feet treading silently on the damp cemetery grass. "I don't have parents. I only have Mother Isabel, but she's sleeping nearby." She pointed vaguely toward the older rows of the cemetery. "And you come here every day at 6 in the morning to talk to the lady with the white flowers." The precise observation sent a chill down Arthur's spine. How did this child know his routine? How long had he been watched? You stay here in the cemetery?" "Sometimes," Sophie answered evasively. "Sometimes I sleep under the awning of Mr. Henderson's bakery, sometimes on the park bench. It depends on the day." Her nonchalance when talking about living on the streets made Arthur's stomach turn. "My God, child, you can't live like this," he said, getting up from the ground and dusting the dirt from his knees. "Where is this Mother Isabel you mentioned?" Sophie's eyes filled with an even deeper sadness. "She's in the long sleep, like your flower lady, but she told me that one day a very kind man would come for me." She paused, studying Arthur's face with a disconcerting intensity. "You have the face of a kind man." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. Throughout all his years of marriage to Eleanor, they had desperately tried to have children. Endless doctor's appointments, expensive treatments, hopes that crumbled month after month. Infertility had been an open wound in their marriage, a silent sorrow they both carried, but rarely discussed openly. "Sophie, you can't keep living on the streets," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "It's dangerous. You could get sick. Something terrible could happen." The girl tilted her head as if evaluating his words. "You talk just like Mother Isabel used to. She was always worried about me, too." She paused. "She told me a lot of things about you." "About me?" Arthur asked, frowning. "How could she know about me? I never." "She knew you came here every day. She knew you carry a great sadness in your chest. And she knew you needed someone to take care of, just like I need someone to take care of me." Sophie took another step closer. "Mother Isabel said that sometimes the right people meet in the saddest places." Arthur was silent for a long moment, processing the child's words. There was something supernatural in the way she seemed to understand his pain, as if she possessed a wisdom that transcended her age. The morning wind rustled the branches of the surrounding trees, creating dancing shadows over the graves. "Sophie, I need to think about this," he said finally. "But I can't let you keep sleeping on the street. How about I bring you some things tomorrow? Food, a blanket." The girl's eyes shone with cautious hope. "You'd really come back?" "I come back every day," Arthur replied, surprised by the ease of the promise, "always at 6 in the morning." Sophie smiled for the first time since they had met, a small but genuine smile that lit up her dirty face. "Then I'll be waiting." As Arthur walked back to his car, he felt a strange weight in his chest. It wasn't just the familiar guilt he had carried for 3 years, but something new and unsettling. He had seen something in that child's eyes that he recognized in himself, the deep pain of someone who had lost everything and didn't know how to go on. That morning, for the first time in 3 years, Arthur couldn't concentrate on his store's business. Sophie's words echoed in his mind, especially the remark about Mother Isabel knowing details about his life. How was it possible? And why did that child seem to know exactly which words to use to strike the most sensitive chords of his heart? When the local church bell struck 6 in the evening, Arthur made a decision that would change his life forever. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the cemetery carrying a thermal bag filled with fresh bread, fruit, and a small blanket he had bought the day before. His heart beat irregularly as he walked through the familiar rows of graves, searching for the girl who had disrupted his 3-year routine. Sophie was exactly where he expected to find her, sitting beside Eleanor's grave, talking softly to the headstone, as if speaking to a close friend. Seeing him approach, she smiled and waved as if they were old acquaintances. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said, using his name for the first time. "I told Mrs. Eleanor you would be back." Arthur stopped abruptly. How do you know my name? And how do you know my wife's name?" Sophie pointed to the headstone. "It's written here, Eleanor Blackwood, beloved wife of Arthur. And Mother Isabel always talked about Mr. Blackwood from the furniture stores." She paused, observing his confused expression. "She said you were a good man, but very sad." The businessman sat heavily on the bench near the grave, the bag of food forgotten by his side. "Sophie, I need you to tell me more about this Mother Isabel. How did she know me?" The girl took an apple from the bag and bit into it eagerly, a clear sign she hadn't eaten properly in a long time. Mother Isabel worked in a big house, cleaning and cooking. Sometimes she got very sick and coughed up blood, but she never wanted to go to the doctor because she said she didn't have money. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. Where was this big house? "I don't know exactly. She would leave early in the morning and come back very late. She lived with me in a small house near the bus station, but the owner kicked us out when she got too sick to work. Sophie chewed slowly, savoring every piece of the fruit. After that, we slept in different places for a while until she went to sleep forever. The pieces of a disturbing puzzle began to form in Arthur's mind. During the last years of Eleanor's life, they had occasionally hired a cleaning lady who came a few times a week to help with the house. A simple, middle-aged woman who always worked in silence and politely refused any attempt at conversation Eleanor initiated. Sophie. Do you remember Mother Isabel's full name? Isabel Norton, the girl replied promptly. She always made me repeat her full name so I would never forget. Arthur felt the world spin around him. Isabel Norton. The surname Norton was familiar, very familiar. His mind flew back decades to a family feud that had divided the Nortons and the Blackwoods when he was just a teenager. An inheritance dispute that had resulted in years of silence and unresolved bitterness. My God, he murmured, running his hands over his face. Isabel Norton. Was she Uncle Gerald's daughter? Sophie tilted her head, confused. I don't know who Uncle Gerald is. Mother Isabel didn't talk much about her family. She only said you were distant relatives and that one day, if anything happened to her, I should look for Mr. Blackwood in the cemetery. The businessman stood up abruptly and began to pace, trying to process the devastating information. If Isabel was indeed the daughter of Gerald Norton, his mother's brother, then Sophie was not just any abandoned child. She was his second cousin, blood family that had been neglected for years because of pride and old grudges. Sophie, when did Mother Isabel? When did she pass away? Last winter. It was very cold and she was coughing a lot during the night. In the morning, she didn't wake up. The girl spoke with a disturbing matter-of-factness, as if the pain had already been digested and accepted. Some men came and took her away. They said I was too little to go with them. Arthur felt a wave of nausea as he imagined a 4-year-old child dealing alone with the loss of the only person who cared for her. And you've been living on the streets ever since. Not exactly on the streets, Sophie corrected. I know good places to sleep. Mrs. Gable at the bakery sometimes gives me old bread. Mr. Antonio from the corner market lets me take fruit that falls on the floor. And here in the cemetery, no one bothers me. The naturalness with which the child described her daily struggle for survival broke Arthur's heart. For months, while he wallowed in self-pity and guilt, his own family, a 4-year-old girl, was fighting not to starve just a few miles away. Sophie, you're not going to sleep on the street anymore, he said, with a determination that surprised him. You're going to live with me. The girl looked at him with a mixture of hope and distrust. For real? You won't send me away when you get tired of me? Never, Arthur replied, and in that moment, he understood he was making a promise that would change his life completely. You are my family. That afternoon, Arthur brought Sophie to his house for the first time. The 2-story mansion in the most affluent neighborhood of Willow Creek seemed even more empty and silent than usual as they crossed the main threshold. Sophie looked at everything with wide eyes, clearly intimidated by the luxury that surrounded her. This will be your room, Arthur said, opening the door to the old office Eleanor used for her design projects. He had quickly converted the space, buying a child's bed, toys, and proper clothes for a 4-year-old girl. Sophie entered the room cautiously, touching the new furniture as if it were made of crystal and might break at any moment. It's very pretty, she whispered, but can I sleep in the garden? I like to see the stars. Why? Isn't the bed comfortable? The girl shrank slightly. Closed spaces scare me. When Mother Isabel got very sick, they locked her in a small room at the hospital, and she couldn't breathe properly. Arthur understood that Sophie's traumas would be much deeper and more complex than he had initially imagined. He decided not to force the situation. All right. For now, you can sleep wherever you feel safest. We'll take it slow. In the following days, a new routine was established. Arthur would wake up early, visit Eleanor's grave with Sophie by his side, and then take the girl to the store with him, not yet knowing where else to leave her. The employees of the furniture chain were initially surprised by the child's presence, but soon grew accustomed to seeing her playing quietly in a corner of the office. It was during one of these afternoons at the store that Dr. Alan Peterson, a respected pediatrician in the city, showed up unexpectedly. Arthur knew him by sight, but they had never spoken personally. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to talk to you about the girl," the doctor said, his expression grave. "I heard you've taken custody of Sophie Norton." "You know Sophie?" Arthur asked, surprised. "I knew Isabel for some years. I treated both of them several times." Dr. Peterson looked toward where Sophie was playing, his expression laden with concern. "The girl has some health issues you need to be aware of. Isabel was never able to afford the proper treatment." Arthur felt the ground move beneath his feet. "What kind of issues?" "Sophie has developed chronic asthma due to the poor condition she lived in. Additionally, there are signs of prolonged malnutrition that have affected her development. She will need regular medical follow-up and expensive medications." The doctor paused. "Isabel died, knowing she couldn't provide the treatment Sophie needed." The revelation hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. Not only had he neglected Isabel for years, but his cousin had died, carrying the burden of not being able to properly care for the daughter who depended on her. "Doctor, I will do whatever is necessary," Arthur said in a choked voice. "Cost is not an issue." Dr. Peterson studied him for a moment. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to be honest with you. Isabel made me promise something before she died. She asked me to find someone who could take proper care of Sophie." He made a significant pause. "She specifically mentioned your name." Arthur fell silent, processing yet another revelation that shook his certainties. Isabel not only knew him, she had consciously planned for him to take responsibility for Sophie. "Why didn't she approach me directly?" he finally asked. "Pride, perhaps, or fear of rejection?" Isabel knew about the old feud between the families. Dr. Peterson looked again at Sophie. "But she also knew you were a good man, and that you would have the resources to give Sophie what she couldn't." That night, Arthur sat in the garden of his house, watching Sophie sleep under the stars, wrapped in the blanket he had brought to the cemetery. The girl had once again refused to sleep inside the house, preferring the security of the open space. As he watched her, Arthur understood that his life had changed irreversibly. He was no longer just a grieving man visiting graves and mourning lost opportunities. He was now responsible for a traumatized child who carried complex health problems and a history of abandonment that mirrored his own feelings of inadequacy. But there was something more disturbing: the growing certainty that Sophie knew much more about his life and about Eleanor than a 4-year-old should know, and that Isabel had orchestrated their meeting in a way he still didn't fully comprehend. 2 weeks after Sophie moved into Arthur's house, the nightmares began. Every night around 3 in the morning, desperate screams echoed through the garden, waking Arthur with a start. He would find the girl sitting under the mango tree, trembling and crying, muttering incomprehensible words about the dark room and Mother Isabel who wouldn't wake up. "Sophie, my dear, it was just a dream," Arthur would say, kneeling beside her and offering a hug that the girl hesitantly accepted. "You're safe now." "It wasn't a dream," she would insist, her large eyes fixed on something only she could see. "Mother Isabel came to visit me. She said there's something very important you need to know." The chills that ran down Arthur's spine during these nightly conversations weren't just from the cool night air. There was something in the way Sophie spoke about Isabel, as if she still maintained communication with the cousin who had passed. Dr. Peterson had warned about possible psychological traumas, but this seemed to go beyond simple childhood grieving processes. It was during one of these early mornings that Helen Swanson appeared for the first time. The 51-year-old social worker arrived at Arthur's house on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by a court officer and carrying a folder full of documents that would turn his life into a living hell for the next few months. "Mr. Arthur Blackwood?" she asked, her voice laden with professional authority. "I'm Helen Swanson, a social worker from the City Council. I received an anonymous tip about a minor living in an irregular situation at this address." Arthur felt the ground move beneath his feet. "Irregular situation? What are you talking about?" The child, Sophie Norton, was removed from a high-risk environment and placed in your care without the proper legal procedures, Helen explained, consulting her papers. "You do not have formal custody of the child, you have not undergone a psychological evaluation, and there are questions about your fitness to care for a traumatized minor." Sophie appeared at the kitchen door at that moment, watching the conversation with frightened eyes. Upon seeing strangers in the house, she ran behind Arthur and hid, clinging to his leg with desperate force. "Please," Arthur said, instinctively placing a protective hand on the girl's head. "She's finally starting to feel safe. You can't just—" "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your good intentions," Helen interrupted, but her expression remained inflexible. "However, there are protocols that must be followed. A child with Sophie's traumatic history needs specialized care that only prepared institutions can offer." Helen's primary motivation was genuine, but tainted by her own painful experiences. At 8 years old, she had been removed from an unsuitable foster family after months of subtle neglect that authorities were slow to detect. Since then, she had developed a deep mistrust of informal custody arrangements, especially involving single men and vulnerable children. "Are you going to take me away?" Sophie asked in a tiny voice, peeking out from behind Arthur. "I don't want to go. I like sleeping in the garden and talking to Mrs. Eleanor." Helen frowned. "The girl sleeps in the garden? That confirms my concerns about inadequate living conditions." "She chooses to sleep there," Arthur explained desperately. "She's afraid of enclosed spaces because of her trauma. I'm respecting her time to adapt. Mr. Blackwood, you are not trained in child psychology to make these decisions." Helen retorted. "As of today, Sophie will be temporarily placed in the municipal shelter while we assess her situation." The scream Sophie let out at that moment was something Arthur would never forget. A primal sound of absolute terror that seemed to come from the depths of her traumatized soul. The girl clung to him with superhuman strength, her small nails digging into his arms. "Don't let them take me," she screamed between sobs. "Mother Isabel said you would take care of me. She said you were my family." Arthur felt tears burn his eyes as he tried to console the hysterical child. "Sophie, I will come for you. It's only temporary. I promise I will come for you." But his words sounded hollow even to himself. Helen and the officer were already approaching, and Arthur understood with growing horror that there was nothing he could do at that moment to stop them from taking Sophie. The following days were a bureaucratic nightmare. Arthur hired the best lawyers in Willow Creek, began the formal custody process, submitted to humiliating psychological evaluations, and completely renovated a room in the house to meet the technical specifications required for housing a minor. During this process, Mr. Markham, the accountant who had worked with Isabel, appeared in his office with information that completely changed his understanding of the situation. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to tell you something about Isabel that she made me promise to keep secret while she was alive," said Markham, a nervous 38-year-old man who clearly carried a weight on his conscience. "Isabel wasn't just your cleaning lady. She had been working for your wife Eleanor for almost 5 years. Arthur stopped reviewing the legal documents and stared at the accountant. "What do you mean? Eleanor never mentioned." "Because Mrs. Eleanor requested absolute secrecy. Isabel wasn't just an employee, she was She was a kind of confidant. Your wife knew about Sophie since the girl was born. Markham paused, clearly uncomfortable. And for the last 2 years, Mrs. Eleanor was regularly sending money to help with the child's medical expenses. Arthur's world crumbled once again. Eleanor knew about Sophie and never told me. Isabel told me that Mrs. Eleanor wanted to tell you, but she was afraid of how you would react. Apparently, she feared you would feel obligated out of pity, not genuine love. Markham took some papers from his folder. These are copies of the bank transfers. Mrs. Eleanor spent over $30,000 on medical treatments for Sophie in the last 2 years. Arthur held the documents with trembling hands, reading and rereading the amounts and dates. Eleanor had been secretly taking care of his family for years, carrying alone the weight of a responsibility that should have been shared. There's one more thing, Markham continued. Isabel was desperate in her last months because she found out Sophie has a rare medical condition that will require expensive treatments for the rest of her life. She was trying to save money for an experimental surgery, but... What kind of condition? Arthur interrupted, feeling panic rise in his chest. A heart problem. Dr. Peterson can explain better. But basically, Sophie will need specialized cardiac care. Isabel died knowing she couldn't afford the treatment. That night, Arthur visited Sophie at the municipal shelter for the first time since they had taken her. The girl was visibly thinner and paler, sitting alone in a corner of the courtyard while other children played around her. "Did you come to get me?" she asked, her large eyes shining with desperate hope. "I can't yet, my dear, but I'm working on it. Soon you'll be back home." Arthur knelt to be at her level. "Sophie, I need to ask you something. Did you know that Eleanor knew your mother, Isabel?" The girl nodded slowly. "Mother Isabel always said Mrs. Eleanor was an angel. She would visit us sometimes, bring medicine and food." She paused. "And she always talked about you, Mr. Blackwood. She said you were the kindest man in the world, but you were very sad. Why did you never tell me? Mother Isabel said you needed to find out on your own that you wanted to take care of me, that if she told you, you would do it out of obligation and not out of love." Sophie gently touched Arthur's face. "But Mrs. Eleanor said that when she went away, you would need someone to love, and that I would need someone to love me too." Arthur hugged the girl, finally understanding the complexity of what Eleanor and Isabel had orchestrated. His wife had spent years secretly planning her own replacement, ensuring that when she was gone, he would have a reason to keep living and loving. But now, Sophie was away from him, in a cold shelter where she cried every night, and Arthur discovered that his chain of stores was facing a devastating financial crisis. Gregory Monroe, his minority partner, had been embezzling funds for 2 years, taking advantage of his negligence during his grief to practically bankrupt the company. "Mr. Blackwood," said Mr. Julian Reed, his family lawyer, during a particularly tense meeting, "I have to be direct with you. If we prosecute Gregory criminally, the public exposure could harm your chances of getting custody of Sophie. Helen Swanson is looking for any reason to deem you unfit." Arthur looked out his office window toward the municipal shelter, visible in the distance. He was being forced to choose between justice and the chance to get Sophie back. And time was running out. The girl was getting more fragile every day, and her heart problems could worsen without the proper care he could provide. That night, alone in his empty house, Arthur made a decision that would change everything again. Arthur's decision was radical. He would sell half of his store chain to get the money needed for Sophie's heart treatment, even though it meant accepting the deal with Gregory and letting the fraudster go unpunished. The next morning, he approached Mr. Reed with a determination the lawyer hadn't seen in months. "Julian, we're accepting the deal with Gregory." "I need the money from the sale immediately," Arthur said, ignoring the lawyer's surprised expression. "And I want you to find the best pediatric cardiologist in the country. Cost is not an issue. Mr. Blackwood, this means Gregory will go unpunished after stealing almost $200,000 from the company, Mr. Reed warned. Are you sure about this? I am. Sophie is more important than any amount of money. Arthur paused, looking out the window toward the shelter. And I want you to hire a private investigator. I need information on Helen Swanson's past. There's something about her posture that doesn't sit right with me. The investigator, Robert Miles, returned with devastating information 3 days later. Helen had lost her own daughter Marina in a car accident 8 years ago. The girl was in foster care when the accident happened, and Helen had never forgiven herself for not fighting harder to keep her daughter with her. Mr. Blackwood, she's projecting her own guilt onto every case she handles, Robert explained. I found at least 6 families who were unnecessarily separated by her decisions in recent years, always involving single or widowed men. Armed with this information, Arthur requested a hearing with the judge responsible for the case. Judge Charles Morrison, a respected 55-year-old magistrate, listened attentively to the evidence presented about Helen's personal bias. Mr. Blackwood, I understand your situation, but you need to understand that Miss Swanson acts with good intentions, the judge said. However, I will order that another social worker take over the case and re-evaluate Sophie's situation. The new social worker, Ms. Fiona Carter, 42, was an experienced professional who immediately noticed the genuine connection between Arthur and Sophie during her first visit to the shelter. It's clear there is a real effective bond between you two, she told Arthur after observing his interaction with the girl, and the medical reports show that Sophie has regressed significantly since being institutionalized. It was during this visit that Ms. Carter made a discovery that would change everything. While talking with Sophie, the girl casually mentioned that Mrs. Eleanor left a little something hidden for Mr. Blackwood. What little thing, dear? Asked the social worker. A letter. Mother Isabel taught me where it was hidden in the big house. Sophie looked at Arthur. You never looked in Mrs. Eleanor's office? Arthur felt his heart race. For the 3 years since Eleanor's passing, he had completely avoided her office, keeping the door locked like some kind of untouched sanctuary. No, Sophie. I could never bring myself to go in there. That afternoon, Mr. Reed accompanied Arthur to the house to officially open Eleanor's office in the presence of the social worker. The room was exactly as Eleanor had left it, design papers scattered about, fabric samples, and photographs of old projects. Sophie, who had been given special permission to join the search, went straight to a bookshelf and pointed to a specific volume on interior design. Mother Isabel said it's behind this book. Mr. Reed removed the volume and found a sealed envelope with the name, For Arthur, When You Find Your New Purpose, written in Eleanor's delicate handwriting. With trembling hands, Arthur opened the envelope. Inside was a 3-page letter and a legal document that left him speechless. My dearest Arthur, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have finally found Sophie and decided to open your heart to her. Isabel and I planned this for 2 years, ever since we found out about my terminal condition. Arthur had to sit down, his legs shaking. Eleanor had hidden from him not only her knowledge of Sophie, but also her own illness. I knew you would need a reason to keep living after I was gone, the letter continued, and Sophie needed someone who could give her everything Isabel couldn't. I spent my last months secretly arranging the transfer of funds to secure her future. The attached document was a codicil to her will that Arthur had never seen. Eleanor had created a trust fund using her family inheritance, allocating $300,000 specifically for Sophie's medical care. The money is deposited in a joint account that can only be accessed if you formally assume custody of the girl, the letter explained. I knew your heart better than you did. Arthur, I knew that when you found Sophie, you would make the right choice. But the most impactful revelation came on the last page. Isabel told me that Sophie sometimes pretends to know things she shouldn't, as a way of protecting herself. She is smarter than she appears, and has learned to observe adults to get what she needs. Don't be fooled by her apparent maturity. She is just a 4-year-old child who has lived through terrible traumas. Mr. Reed was the first to break the silence. Mr. Blackwood, this document completely changes the legal situation. With this trust fund and the evidence of prior planning by your wife, we have solid grounds for permanent custody. Ms. Carter nodded. And from a psychological standpoint, it's clear that both Eleanor and Isabel believed you would be the ideal guardian for Sophie. Sophie, who had remained quiet throughout the reading, approached Arthur and gently touched his hand. Mother Isabel said you would cry when you read Mrs. Eleanor's letter. She said they were tears of happiness. Arthur looked at the girl with a completely new understanding. Sophie, did you know about this letter the whole time? She nodded shyly. Mother Isabel taught me many things before she went to sleep. She said I would need to be clever to win your heart, but that when I did, you would be the most caring daddy in the world. The final custody hearing for Sophie took place 2 weeks before Christmas. Judge Charles Morrison heard all the testimonies, analyzed the documents presented, and made his decision based not only on the legal paperwork, but on the evident transformation Arthur had undergone during the months of fighting for the girl. Mr. Blackwood, it is evident that both you and the minor have developed a genuine and healthy, effective bond. I grant permanent custody of Sophie Norton on the condition that she continues regular medical follow-up for her cardiac condition. When they left the courthouse, Sophie held tightly to Arthur's hand, but this time not as a frightened child seeking protection, but as a daughter walking beside her father. Daddy Arthur, she said, using the title for the first time. Can I keep sleeping in the garden until I get used to the room? You can sleep wherever you want, my daughter, he replied, finally understanding that family is not built through obligation or guilt, but through daily choices of love and dedication. 6 months later, on a sunny June morning, Arthur and Sophie visited Eleanor's grave together. The girl had grown and gained weight, her heart problems were being successfully treated, and she had finally started sleeping inside the house, in the room Arthur had prepared with so much care. Thank you, my love, Arthur whispered to the headstone. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes we lose people we love only to find others who need our love. Sophie placed a colorful drawing on the grave, a portrait of 3 people holding hands, herself, Arthur, and a female figure who clearly represented Eleanor. Mrs. Eleanor, now I have a real daddy, and he has a real daughter too. As they walked back home, Arthur reflected on how his life had changed completely. From a grieving and embittered businessman, he had transformed into a dedicated father who discovered that happiness doesn't come from not losing the people we love, but from having the courage to love again when love knocks on our door. Sophie, running ahead of him through the garden, represented not just a second chance at family, but the proof that true love transcends blood, time, and even death, and that sometimes the most painful losses in life are just preparations for the most significant encounters yet to come. That afternoon, for the first time in 4 years, Arthur's house echoed with childish laughter, and in the years that followed, that laughter would become the most precious soundtrack of a family built on the solid foundation of consciously chosen love, day after day, just as Eleanor and Isabel had dreamed it would. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.